In this video, I'm going to introduce a very important tool. It is called a timeline. Timeline is used to model investment projects. This is a timeline. The left side represents the beginning of the investment. This is the first period into the investment. This is the second period into the investment. It is very important to remember those tick marks on the timeline do not represent years, they represent number of periods. So how can we define a period on the timeline? Normally, one period is the time it takes for the investment project to make one interest payment. For example, if the project is going to make one interest payment per month, then one period should be defined as a month. Another example, if the investor is able to receive two interest payments per year from the investment, then one period should be defined as 6 months. The right side represents the end of the investment. So here we are talking about an investment that lasts for M periods. We can put more information on the timeline. For example, the period interest payment is computed using period interest rate. We can put on period interest rate on the timeline. For example, if the investment is making monthly interest payment and the monthly interest rate is 1%, then we can write down interest rate per period is 1%. So that's 1% per period. There will be cash going into and coming out of the investment project. We can also write down the cash flows on the timeline. So the cash flow with subscript 0 represents the cash flow that is occurring at the current time. So this is the first cash flow. So that's the second, actually that's the cash flow at the end of the first period. This is the cash flow at the end of the second period, and we can have cash flow at the end of the investment. There are two types of cash flows, cash inflow and cash outflow. If the investor is taking money out of his pocket and puts the money into the investment, in other words, the money is leaving the investor, this is a cash outflow. And the cash outflows are represented by negative numbers on the timeline. If the investor is receiving money from the investment, in other words, the money goes into the investor's pocket, this is a cash inflow. Cash inflows are represented by positive numbers on the timeline. Let me give you a simple example. Suppose an investor is going to save for 1 year. This investor is going to put on $100 at the beginning of each quarter. And the investment is going to pay 1% interest rate per quarter. Now, how can we model this investment project on a timeline? The first thing is we are talking about a 1-year investment, but because the investment is making quarterly interest payments, so one period should be defined as a quarter. There will be 4 quarters in a year. So we have present time, the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the last quarter. So this is a 4-quarter investment, one year investment period. Now as I mentioned, the quarterly interest rate is 1%. So we write down the interest rate per period equals 1%. Now the investor is going to deposit $100 at the beginning of each period. So he is going to take $100 out of his pocket and puts the $100 into the investment. So the $100 at the beginning of each quarter is a cash outflow. So the first $100 happens today. That's the beginning of the first period. Is a cash outflow, so we put on negative $100. This is a cash outflow. It goes into the investment. At the beginning of the second quarter, this investor is going to make another $100 deposit. So again, it's a cash outflow. So that's a negative $100. This is the third deposit. Again, it's a cash outflow, negative $100. And at beginning of the last quarter, so this is the beginning of the last quarter, is another deposit, another cash outflow, so it's a negative $100. By the end of the investment period, so by the end of the year, in this account, the investor should have $410.10. You don't have to understand how I computed this number. We will talk about the calculation in the future. But at the end of the investment period, the balance on the account, the balance of the investment project is $410.10. So the investor is able to make a withdrawal. This $410.10 will go into the investor's pocket. So that is a cash inflow. So we can write down positive $410.10. So that's how we use the timeline to model this simple investment project.